Hello, and thank you so much for joining in this live broadcast or watching the recording of this broadcast. So, we're going to be talking today about one of the most controversial topics on the planet. That guy. Why is it controversial? Why is Jesus so controversial? Well, there's lots of reasons, but one of the main ones seems to be that no one can really agree on who he was and what he taught. There's a wide range of different different views and opinions. And what I'm going to be talking about today is the perspective, the view, the answer to the question, what did Christ actually teach? Based on someone who I believe is one of, if not the few people on this planet who's qualified to, all of us can have our opinion and speak our opinions, sure, but someone actually who's actually qualified to say, this is what Christ taught, this is what Christ meant. And his name is Bruno Gröning. And the reason why I'm utterly convinced he's qualified is because he was like Christ. He followed the path of Christ, he followed the teachings of Christ, and around him, healings happened. Blind people regained their vision. Paralyzed people stood up out of their wheelchairs. Terminal cases of cancer vanished. And he said, what I'm teaching is simply the teachings of Jesus Christ. And more importantly, Bruno Gröning didn't go about studying. He didn't go and study the Bible and then say, oh, well, this is what Christ taught. This is what Christ meant. By his own admission, he never read an entire book from start to finish. And yet somehow he seemed to know just about everything. He was able to read people's minds, predict their future. He knew, and he said the way he knew these things is he had a direct connection to God, that he had a deep, deep connection to God. And ultimately that's what he taught, was how to have a deep connection to God so you can know things for yourself without needing to refer to a book, without needing to come to YouTube, come listen to some guy on YouTube, without needing to go to church or to a doctor or to a historian. Not that any of those things are bad and wrong. I do all of them. And there's another way of knowing that's been mostly forgotten by human beings. We think of all of our knowledge has to do with generally things we see with one of our senses or things we've read in books. But there's another kind of knowledge where you can just directly know something. And that's what Bruno Gröning was able to do. He was able to look at someone and know their past, and oftentimes able to predict their future. How was he able to do this? Again, he gave very simple instructions. I'll come back to that in a moment, but he gave instructions for how we can do it. And my assumption is that's the exact way he did it, is that he knew how to listen deeply inside himself. He said, and telling other people to do this, he said, listen deeply inside yourself. Listen to your conscience, for your conscience is where your soul is, and that's where God lives. He over and over and over called people to listen to God, not to other people. And he said all of our problems stem from the fact that we listened to other people who thought they knew the truth, but actually didn't. And then we took it on as true. This was so vividly brought forth what he meant by this. Because think about it, as children, we just, parents, teachers, other kids say things, and we don't have the capacity yet to determine what's true or not true. So we just take it as truth. But this is so vividly brought forth in the story of a woman who was a girl who was born deaf, and so she wasn't able to hear what other people said, and she just lived, by her own account, she just lived in this world of love, and everyone treated her beautifully, and she just kind of radiated love. And then she had an operation where they were actually able to fix her hearing so that she was able to hear. And she was in for quite a shock because then she learned words that she hadn't learned before, judgmental words like, oh, you know, they're blah, 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 even curse words, so forth and so on, judgmental words that put other people down. And over time, that feeling of love and innocence and joy that she just radiated, it left her because she started to take in these concepts, take in these judgments. And it was only decades later as an adult that she went on sort of a healing journey and she realized what had happened. For her, it had been devastating. She had just lived in this joy. I think she had the operation when she was like 12. So she kind of stayed in that what we call childlike innocence because she just didn't hear the different judgments and attacks and so forth and so on. And she just stayed in that place of love and joy and innocence until it was lost, because then she started listening to other people. So her story really mirrors, I believe, I know it mirrors my story, but I believe it mirrors all of our stories, is that we came into this world with a deep, deep connection to God. I think that's one of the reasons we love babies so much. However, at a certain point, babies start taking in thoughts and concepts, some of them helpful, some of them not helpful. The ones that are not helpful are the ones that disconnect us from God. And then once we feel disconnected from God, then we have to rely on other people and books to know things. Whereas as children, before that fall from innocence, we fundamentally know something about life, about God. We know that God is goodness and that life is good and that love and joy are natural and are all around us. So, friends, I'd like to once again welcome everyone who's joined in. So let's just put aside all our old ideas about what we are, our old ideas about what life is about, and our old ideas about God, and even our old ideas about Christ. Let's just put them aside. You can pick them up at the end of the gathering, but I invite you to put them aside and see about looking at the world from a different perspective. So one of the things that Bruno Gröning taught was how to take in life energy. And he pointed out that this life energy is divine and that it actually heals. So I'm going to lead us through a little guided receiving of that energy, attuning ourselves to it. And it's very simple to do. Please sit with your legs uncrossed, feet flat on the floor. Hands on your legs, palms facing upwards. Back, if possible, not leaning against your chair. And if you need to, that's okay. Please close your eyes. And now hand over to your understanding of a higher power. Every problem, every worry, every situation about which we're feeling stressed, and hand over any illness, really giving away the idea that you even have an illness. And then focus your entire attention on your healing. And ask to receive this divine life energy. And observe your body, having the intention to take this energy in. Noticing what you're feeling, having the intention to absorb this vital life energy. Trusting that every sensation you feel now is a step toward your healing. Observing the body, intending, willing to fill up with this divine energy and let it remove everything not good. So, to anyone who's new, I invite you to continue this practice. I'm going to speak and read a little. So, it seems to me that we human beings have this natural, mm, maybe it's instinct, maybe it's, I'll just stick with instinct for now, to trust and to rely on something. Obviously, as children, we are completely dependent on our parents on a biological level, and as we grow older and we have a little bit more of a sense of choice, I believe it's very important to ask, what do I trust in? What do I rely on? And to see if we're trusting and relying and following. What do we listen to? In the German word for listen, which Bruno spoken, I believe the meaning to be more like to hearken, to really give our full attention to. And it's very tempting to, I don't want to say natural. I'm tempted to say natural, but it's very easy to um, put our faith or trust in a relationship or a job or a community or a friendship um, or a church or a book. And sadly enough, I'd say most of us have been educated or taught to do that. But is that the right place to put this very deep drive we have inside of us? This drive to follow, to trust. Again, I'm not saying those things are bad by any means, but the question is, are they reliable? Because as a human being, I know that what I'm looking for is something totally reliable. Bruno Gröning pointed out that many people are not fully honest with their boss, with the person who employs them, because they're afraid they'll get fired. They sort of become subservient. And yes, that's part of the role of being an employee, is to follow the boss. However, that doesn't mean that um, I think in what Bruno was referring to is people take it to an extreme, is they give their power away and they feel that their boss or their job is what's providing for them. However, Bruno Gröning pointed out that he said, while the little bread giver, meaning the employer, may give up on you, the big bread giver never will. In 1,000 different ways, Bruno Gröning called us to rely on God, just like Christ did, to recognize where our true safety is. Bruno Gröning went so far as to say only God can help us. And I believe he meant on a spiritual level. Obviously, if you're busy and you ask me to do something, I can do it for you, and that's a kind of help. But Bruno Gröning pointed out that all of our problems stem from evil and that only God can remove evil. It also requires a recognition of what our real problem is so we know what solution to apply to it. If our real problem is evil and evil's a spiritual force, it requires a spiritual solution. And the way Bruno Gröning presented evil was that it's the underlying cause of all of our problems. However, this isn't the path that Bruno Gröning taught isn't just, oh, well, I'll just rely on God. And yes, that's the truth. Reliance on God. It's actually something we have to live moment by moment. It's not always easy. Yet Bruno Gröning spoke of this life as a school. So school isn't necessarily meant to be easy. I don't think it's supposed to be hard 24/7, but neither is it supposed to be easy 24/7. When speaking of the challenge of life, Bruno Gröning once said that, in essence, in different ways, he said that the ultimate aim of life is to be at one with God, or as he said, to be fully redeemed or fully saved. But to do that, we have to release all attachments and be able to stay in a place of peace no matter what's going on outside of us. Not a simple task, a simple concept, but to actually do it and live it. And my understanding is that to do this, we need divine help. We need the power of God. And until we're able to directly take that power in ourselves, we need a spiritual helper to help us refine and maintain that divine connection. So let's spend a little time now doing that, finding once again the divine connection, recognizing that God is the solution to every problem. And that, of course, doesn't mean that it's not allowed on this path to go to doctors, or that, it's not okay to try to eat healthier. Not at all. Not saying anything like that. Neither did Bruno. And it's very important to recognize what the ultimate problem is so we can recognize the ultimate solution. So let's spend a little time reflecting on all this, taking this energy in through observing the body, noticing what you're feeling, trusting every sensation is healing happening. Noticing what you feel. My understanding of what Christ taught and what Bruno reminded us of was that our lives need to be dedicated to God, dedicated to being in service to God and God's creation. Let's say, for example, that, if let's say you live on a farm, and let's say for whatever reason, you're not able to ever leave that farm. So your life is then dependent on the food you grow there. So, of course, you're going to serve it with devotion and with love and care. Well, according to Bruno Gröning, our life is utterly dependent on God. it's very easy to think, oh, that's not the case in the 21st century with internets and airplanes and so forth and so on. But here we are in April 2020 and starting to see that um, while we've achieved marvelous things with technology, we human beings aren't all powerful. We're not able to separate ourselves from nature. And when we do, or not live in harmony with nature, we're utterly reliant upon it. And in a similar way, we're utterly reliant upon God. So back to my metaphor, someone who's sort of in this enclosed farm and they can't leave it. If they one day just sort of say, "Oh, I'm not going to tend to the garden today or this week. Yeah, I'm going to read a book. I'm going to, do something other than take care of the farm." And they just do that over a period of time, it's easy to see that they're completely delusional because they're reliant on that farm. Well, friends, we're in a similar boat. We're completely reliant on nature and on God. But we have so many other options nowadays. I used to, there was a bookstore near my house, a used bookstore. And when I was a kid, I was really into comic books. And so as an adult, I would sometimes go by this bookstore, this used bookstore, and just look at the comic section. And I was in awe. There were 100 times, when I was into comics back in the 80s, there were maybe 20 or 30, 40, maybe 40 comic books, meaning like, comic books were kind of like shows. They would each month you would get a new episode. And there were about 40 or 50, in essence, shows, meaning 40 or 50 different comic books. But I went by this bookstore, and of course, this was just a used bookstore. They didn't have every. There are literally, probably just at this particular bookstore, there was 3, 4, 500 different titles. And so I share this. And then, of course, there's an actual comic book store near my house, and there's literally, every month there's 5, 6, 700 new episodes of each comic coming out. And I share this not so much to educate people about the comic book world, and that's just in English, of course, right? And that's just what this store has. I'm sure there's thousands that come out each month just in English. So to point out that this modern world we live in, there's a lot of choices. There's a lot of options for what to do with our time. And what I've come to realize is most of them, 99.9% of them, are distractions from what's real and important. Nature and God and connecting with other people and being of service. Tending to our bodies. Just the nuts and bolts, the absolute fundamentals. Having inner peace. Those are just the absolute, that's just the absolute nuts and bolts of being a human being. But there's so many other things to do, or so many other options. And yet Bruno Gröning very simply said, I call humanity to the great return, or the great turnaround, back to nature, back to God, back to the belief in the goodness in human beings. Bruno Gröning recognized that humanity was fundamentally off course. Sometimes in a situation you can say, oh, this is a little off, or, oh, this is kind of off. There's something that needs to change. Well, we as a race we're so off that Bruno Gröning said we need to just completely reverse everything, every aspect of our life, every aspect of our culture. And the thing is that he called us to do it with God. Not that we're going to go into our laboratories and come up with new technology, though that may be a part of it if it's under divine guidance, but to fundamentally change ourselves and how we live, to fundamentally how we orient, and to fundamentally reorient back to nature and back to God. Let's spend a little time reflecting on this. Taking in this divine energy, this natural divine energy. So I've talked about a lot of big subjects and having a fundamental shift in a way of life. But how to do this? Well, besides taking in this divine energy, and besides deciding, yes, I want to follow the good, very simple, besides trusting, coming to trust and utterly rely on God, the very simple practice, not always easy, is to notice one thought at a time. Is this a good thought or a true thought? Because that's what guides our decisions. And the lack of doing that is what has brought the human race to its current condition, is taking in thoughts and not checking if it's a good or not good thought. And then once we take in a thought, we tend to act on it. So part of the great reversal, the great return back to God, back to nature, back to a harmonious way of living, is watching our thoughts and checking in with each thought. Because not every thought is good and helpful. And we've come, I know I'm breaking the habit, and I imagine most people have the habit of just not being critical enough, not being vigilant enough with their thoughts. So I'll begin wrapping up. I'd like to thank everyone who joined today. Thanks for saying hi, Forever Loving Everything, or saying heya. Hi, Jisoo. That's to Germana. And hi, Magdalena. All right, dear ones. So I wish you all very God-focused. You're welcome, Gerald. A God-focused day. And a day of connecting to nature, even if that's just looking out the window or looking at the sky. Because in essence, we're surrounded by things that have been made by human beings, but we're designed to be surrounded by things that were made by God. Thank you so much for joining in, everyone. Take care. Much, much love.